Greetings, and welcome once more to my great library, where we delve into tales of the macabre and frightening. We peruse these sinister pages for stories that are known, some classic, and some forgotten. Tonight's story is in the latter category. We are going to read a tale by a man named Barry Payne. Payne is perhaps the most fitting surname for a horror writer, but Barry was not known as a horror author. No, he wrote humorous stories in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But nonetheless, he did write a collection of frightening stories called Stories in the Dark, and it is from this collection that I have picked one tale for this evening. It is called The Green Light. Now, let's begin. The man looked down at the figure of the woman on the couch. The little silver clock on the mantelpiece began to chime. He could not bear the sound of it. He flew at the clock like a madman and dashed it on the ground and stamped on it. Then he drew down the blind and opened the door and listened. There was no one on the staircase. Silence seemed now as intolerable to him as sound had been a moment before. He tried to whistle, but his lips were too dry and made only a ridiculous hissing sound. Closing the door behind him, he ran down the staircase and out into the street. The woman on the couch never moved or spoke. It was late in the afternoon. The light from the low sun penetrated the green blind and took from it a horrible colour that seemed to tint the face of the woman on the couch. Flies came out of the dark corners of the room, sulkily busy, crawling and buzzing. One very little fly passed backwards and forwards over the woman's white-ringed hand. It moved rapidly, a black speck. Outside in the street, the man stepped from the pavement into the roadway. A cabman shouted and swore at him, and someone dragged him back by the arm and told him roughly to look where he was going. He stood still for a minute and rubbed his forehead with his hand. This would not do. The critical moment had come, the moment when, above all things, it was necessary that his nerve should be perfect, and his thoughts clear. And now, when he tried to think, a picture came before the thought and filled his mind, the picture of the white face with the green light upon it. And his heart was beating too fast, and it seemed to him almost audibly. He began to feel his pulse, counting the strokes out loud as he stood on the curb. Then he was conscious that 2 or 3 boys and loafers were standing in a little group watching him and laughing at him. One of the loafers handed him his hat. It had fallen off when he dodged back onto the pavement, and he had not noticed it. He took the hat and felt for some coins to give the man. He found a half-crown and a half-penny. He held them in his hand and stared at them, and forgot why he had wanted them. Then he suddenly remembered and gave them. There was a loud yell of laughter. The boys and loafers were running away, and he heard one of them shouting, "Let the old stinker out a bit too soon, ain't they?" And another, "Gad, he's tight. That's all's wrong with him." Again he told himself that this would not do. He must not think of the past, the awful past. He must not think of the future, of his schemes for escape. He must concentrate his thoughts on the present moment until he could get to some place where he could be alone. Yes, Regent's Park would do well, and it was near. He brushed his hat with his coat sleeve, put it on, and walked. He thought about the movement of his feet and the best way to cross the road, and how to avoid running into people, and how to behave as other people in the street behaved. All the things that one generally does unconsciously and automatically required now for their conduct a distinct mental effort. As he walked on, his mind seemed to clear a little. He reached a spot in Regent's Park where he could lie down in the grass with no one near him, out of sight. Now, he said to himself, I need to concentrate my thoughts no longer. I can let them go. In a second he had gone rapidly through the past, the jealousy that had burned in his heart, and the way that he had quieted himself and made his scheme and carried it out slowly. It had been finished that afternoon, when he had lost control over himself, and through the transparent leaves of the tree near him the sun came with a greenish glare. He shuddered and turned away so that he could not see it. Yes, he was to escape. He had made all arrangements for that. He drew from his side pocket a roll of notes and counted them and entered the numbers in his pocket-book. He had changed a cheque for £50 at the bank that morning. The police would find that out and endeavour to trace him by discovering where the notes with those numbers were changed. That was one of his means of escape. He would see to it that the notes were never changed by himself or in any town where he had been or was likely to be. He was going to sacrifice those 10 bank notes to put the police on a wrong scent. He had plenty of money ready in gold, and gold that could not be traced, for his own needs. He chuckled to himself. It was brilliant, this scheme for providing a wrong scent, for making the very carefulness and astuteness of the detective the stumbling block in their way. And it would be so easy to get the notes changed by others. The dishonesty of ordinary human beings would serve his purpose. His mood had changed now to one of exultation. He told himself time after time that he was right. The law would condemn him, but morally he was right, and had only punished the woman as she deserved to be punished. Only he must escape, and yes, he must not forget. He looked round. There was still no one near, but his position did not satisfy him. Not a person must see what he was going to do next. He went on and found a spot near the canal where he seemed to be out of sight and more secure from interruption. Then he took from his pocket a little looking-glass and a pair of scissors. Very carefully he cut away his beard and moustache that hid the thin-lipped wide mouth and the small weak chin. He cut as close as he could, and when he had finished, he looked like a man who had neglected to shave for a day or two. A barber would shave him now without suspicion. He was satisfied with the operation. The glass showed him a face so changed that it startled him to look at it. He glanced at his watch. It was time to start for the station, where his luggage had been waiting since the day before, if he meant to get shaved on the way there. He walked a little way and sat down again. How well everything has been thought out, he said to himself. All would succeed, with a new name and in another country, without that drunken, faithless, beautiful woman. He would grow happy again. He had only meant to sit down for a minute or two, but his thoughts rambled and became nonsense, and suddenly he fell into a deep sleep. He had been overtaxed. An hour passed. The train that he had intended to take steamed out of the station, and still he slept. It grew dusk, and still he slept. When the park keeper touched him on the shoulder, he half awoke and spoke querulously. Then consciousness came back, and slowly he realised what had happened. As he walked slowly out of the park, his mind refreshed with sleep, he for the first time realised something else. In the awful moment when he had left the woman, he had broken down and forgotten everything. The bag of gold was still lying on the table of the room with the green blind. He must go back and get it. It would be horrible to re-enter that room, but it could not be helped. He dared not change the notes himself, and in any case that amount would be insufficient. He must have the gold. It added, he told himself, slightly to the risk of discovery, but only slightly. His servants had all been sent out, and were not to return until 9:30. No one else could have entered the house. He would find everything as he left it, the gold on the table and the figure of the woman on the couch. He would let himself in with his latchkey. No passer-by would take any notice of so ordinary an incident. He had no occasion to hurry now, and he turned into the first barber's shop that he saw. His mind was alert now as it had been when he first formed his scheme. "Let me have your best razor," he said. "My skin's tender. In fact, for the last 2 or 3 days, I haven't been able to shave at all." He chatted with the barber about horse racing and said that he himself had a couple of horses in training. Then he inquired the way to Piccadilly, saying that he was a stranger in London and seemed to take careful note of the barber's directions. He walked briskly away from the shop towards his own house. A comfortable-looking, ruddy-faced woman was coming towards him. A shaft of green light from a chemist's shop window fell full on her face as she passed, and the horror came back upon him. It was difficulty that he checked himself from crying out. He hurried on, but that hideous light seemed to linger in his eyes and to haunt him. "Keep quiet," he kept saying to himself under his breath. "Steady yourself. Don't be a fool." There was an Italian restaurant near, and he went in and drank a couple of glasses of cognac. Then only was he able to go on. As he turned the corner where his house came into sight, he looked up. All the house was dark, but for one great green eye in the centre that looked at him. There were lights in that room. He stood still close to a lamp-post, just touching it to keep his balance. He spoke to himself aloud. "It's green. It's green. Someone's there." A working man passed him, heard him mumbling, looked at him curiously, and went on. The great green eye stared at him and fascinated him. Then other lights darted about, red lights, white lights. Someone must be going up and down the staircase and passages. Had she got off the couch? Was the dead woman walking? How his head throbbed. There were 2 nerves that seemed to sound like 2 consecutive notes on a piano, struck in slow alternation, then quickening to a rapid strike. Whir, whir. Now the 2 notes were struck together, a repeated discord thumped out, clatter, clatter. No, the sound was outside in the street, and it was the sound of people running. There were boys with excited eyes and white faces, and blousy, laughing women, and a little old ferret-faced man who coughed as he ran. A police whistle screamed. In front of the door of the house a black mass grew up, getting quickly bigger and bigger. It was a crowd of people swaying backwards and forwards, kept back by the police. The police! He was discovered then. He must get away at once, not wait another moment. Only the green light was looking at him. "Stop that light!" he called. No one noticed him. The green light went on glimmering and drew him nearer. He had to get there. He was on the outskirts of the crowd now. Why would not the crowd let him pass? Could not they hear that he was being called? He pushed his way, struggling, dragging people on one side. There were angry voices, a hum growing louder and louder. He caught a woman by the neck and flung her aside. She screamed. Someone struck him in the face, and he tried to strike back. Down. He was down on the road. The air was stifling and stinking there. He tried to get up and was forced back. Ah, now he was up again, his coat torn off his back, muddy, bleeding, fighting, spitting, howling like a madman. Damn you all! The crowd was a storm all around him, tossing him here and there. Again and again he was struck. There was blood streaming over his eyes, and through the blood and mingled with blood, he saw the green light looking. There came a sudden lull. A couple of policemen stood by him, and one of them had him by the arm and asked him what he was doing. He began to cry, sobbing like a child. "Take me up there," he said, panting, "where the green light is. It's the dead woman calling." The policeman stood for a moment, hesitating. For a moment the crowd was motionless and silent. Then one of those white-faced boys shrank further back, whispering, "It's the man." The story ends here. A fascinating tale of guilt, perhaps, from Barry Payne, reminiscent of Poe's The Telltale Heart. Did the villain indeed see a green light that was haunting him from the woman he had murdered? Who knows? But what I can tell you is, it's time for you to go. But I hope to see you here again in my great library as we peruse another tale of terror, found somewhere in these sinister pages. Good night.